Hello, welcome guys. Last video we learned a lot of concepts, how we can create controller, services, repository, and then we can map controller function or handler function to each one of the routes, and then how we can register those route and the application. Also, we created reusable functionalities for services and DB connection. We also learned the concept of polymorphism and interface, that is nothing but the abstraction. Moreover, we also learned dependency injection. We had used reflect package to achieve certain functionalities. Now in this video we are going to see what exactly the API is. Since we created API, we'll see using the diagram to get better understanding of data flow, and then we'll dive into code to create the very first login API, which we are going to use or integrate in our client application, that is nothing but our view application. So without talking much, let me open diagram and show it to you. So this is the basic diagram of how data is flowing from client to server. Everything is getting transmitted over HTTP. Of course, HTTP request. We have a lot of method to transfer the data from client to server, but here we are going to use HTTP. And the API which we are going to create here is going to be REST API, that is representational state transfer. What does that mean? That also we'll learn along with this tutorial. So very first thing what I'm going to say, let's assume this is going to be your client. Client is nothing but a machine from where you can machine or system from where you can request some data, or you can post some data to the server. Basically your data is going to post on the server, or you are going to request for the specific data from the server. So let's say you are going, I'll just give one example. For example, let's say you all are using Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, right? So very first thing what you guys are seeing is the sign up page, right, where you can register yourself. So that is client, where you can give your data, and then based how that data is transmitted to server. This data has to be stored somewhere on the server, right? Not on the server, but of course it is going to be stored in the database. So thing is, very first thing when you click on sign up after feeding all those details, right, what it will do is it will initiate one request. It will trigger one request to the application server, and how this request will go on server, of course it will transmit using HTTP server, HTTP request. And then HTTP request means we have to put all the required data, and we have couple of request method. Using that we can trigger that HTTP request. We have get, we have put, we have delete, we have options, and then we have patch as well. So we'll talk each one of that one by one when we are going to create a new API. But for now, using that method, we are going to trigger the request. Right now your data will transmit over communication channel, and then it will reach on server. What is application server? Application server is nothing, it is just a machine like you are using or I am using. So you're in that machine, your application is going to run somewhere, right? So that application, for example, we are going to make this Go application, right? This Go application is going to be run on some machine, right? Either it is going to be a Windows machine, Mac machine, or it is going to be a Linux machine. So once your application is running over there, once our request will reach over the server, right? What server will do? Server will, since the request will reach over the server at some port, right? Now what server will do? Server will forward that request to the application, our application. Basically that configuration we have to do inside the application server itself, like all the request which is coming outside out of this system has to reach somewhere in our application. So that configuration we'll do later. At the time of deployment we'll see that all. And then what will happen here is your request has reached on the server, right? After that this request will be forwarded to your internal application which is running inside this application server. Now this server is responsible for routing your request to the application, and then this request will land on your application on a certain port. So let's say your application is running on port 8667, right? So request will come on 8667, and then from there what application will do? Application will use, since we are using gin context, right? We are using gin framework to handle those requests. what it will do, it will go in the routes file which we have created over here, right? It will find the exact path of the, it will fetch, basically it will take out the URL of the request and then match exact path of those URL. Once your routes match with that URL exactly, and then it will also match the request method which we saw here in the diagram, right? Request method. So if it's matched successfully all those criteria, then already we have mapped those particular paths with this controller function, you can see, right? So basically this function is going to be triggered. At the end, what we are going to do is we are going to trigger some functionalities, and we are providing the data from somewhere else using network, right? Similar thing can happen in the application. For example, let's say this is one of the method, right? How we are going to utilize this method is we are going to pass this router over here, right, from somewhere if we are going to use it, and we are directly calling this function inside our application, inside this Go application. Since this function is internally present in the function, we are able to directly call it somewhere in the program. But how can a function be triggered from outside, right? Which does not exist inside the application server. So that is the concept of API. Basically, using API, you are going to trigger certain functionalities, and if that functionalities need some data, then of course that data will be coming inside the API. That is that is the concept of API. API is application interface, application programming interface. It makes your call application server call easy. Basically, you don't have to care about anything. You will just say, okay, you just need to you trigger this API with certain data, and then the request will arrive on the server, and accordingly the server will trigger that specific controller function or handler function to handle those functionalities properly. Now, for example, let's say this request arrived on your application server. I'm going to take the exact scenario over here. So let's say request arrived on add, right? Add path, and everything matches, request method and path matches, then this function is going to be triggered, right? So now here what we are expecting is in the request body, right? We are expecting a JSON data, raw JSON data, right? So we are taking out those raw JSON data and then assigning it to DTO, and then we are doing rest of the functionalities over here. At last, what it is going to do is it is going to put all those data. If we are going to call create functionalities, then it is going to take all those client data and put it inside the storage. That is nothing but the database, right? So this is how API communication works with the with the server. And then once the request is processed successfully, we are finally going to return some response that we already saw here, right? We can see that in controller. Okay, here we have finally, once process has been over, all the functionality has been executed, right? And then finally we are going to return some response. If it is going to throw some error, then of course I'm going to return those errors, as well as if it is successful, I'm going to return the success response. And then finally we are getting back the data, okay, you have signed up successfully. That is how the API works. Now without delaying much, let's get into code. We'll create one login API, and then from there we'll create a lot of APIs which we are going to integrate in our client application, view application, and then make our application work properly. So very first thing what I'm going to do here is I'm going to write couple of utility methods, and for that I'm going to create one file, utils.go. Alright, so very first thing is I'm going to mark this as a utils package, right? Very first thing that is we need to do. And then here I will write func map to struct. What it will do is it will, since we can see here in the repository all the data which is getting returned, that is in the form of interface, right? And this interface is nothing but, if we'll go inside, we can see that it is going to be let me see that. Okay, yeah, it's going to be of map of string and interface. So this interface has to be returned, has to be in the format of map and interface, but at last we are going to play with the struct, since we will be having model, right? We created model, so everything, every data should be mapped with the model itself, and then using the model we can perform certain functionality. And why we are going to do that is because model should be used everywhere in the program where we need it. Model represents the data, what data we are going to use. Either it is coming from the client or we are taking the data from the database, right? Those both of those data should be at the end mapped with the model, so that we can understand it easily, like, okay, the data which we are going to use is of some model, right? It is going to be user model or book model. So it is basically, it should be basically a structured data, right? But then we have function map and interface over here, map of string and interface. We are not sure about the exact data, what data we are going to get from the database, but at last we have to map this data through the structure so that we can make it a structured data, right? For that I'm going to create this map to a struct function. What it will do is it will just accept one map of a string, or you can say we'll just give map of, okay, map, let's say map of a string and then interface. All right, so here what I'm going to do is I'm going to give variable name, let's say data, right? And then it is going to return result. Interface will be there as well, right? Result, in which format we need it, so we can say that as well. And then it's going to return error, right? So now finally what I'm going to do is I'm going to use JSON data and then error, and I'm going to use JSON package to Marshall. Okay, on JSON package we have one method Marshall. What it will do is it will just convert those data into JSON data, and then finally what we will do is we will just unmarshal this data in back into the resultant interface. So here I'm just going to pass the data which is coming from the function argument, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to check, of course, if error not equals to nil, and if there's any error I'm going to return error. So finally I need to import, for handling the JSON data we have that encoding package, and then we have the JSON encoding module, and then we have the JSON package over there. So that is fine. And finally we are going to do is JSON dot unmarshal. We have unmarshal function over there, okay, and then we'll pass that JSON data over here as well as the result. So what it will do is it will convert this JSON data into the resultant interface. All right, and then again I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to check for the error. If there's any error it will return error, or else I'm going to return nil. Fine. I'm not going to return any data from here, since what it will do is it will automatically mark this, not mark but the map this JSON data into the resultant interface. And basically what we are doing here is we are just modifying the actual object here. We'll pass the address of those, and then it will work. It will modify the original object itself, right? So now we are done with this method. Fine. And then what I will do is I will just go here in service. All right, we created a function create functionality. Now I need one more method which will fetch user data from DB, right? So here what I'm going to say is user service and find one user, right? And based on what we are going to find the user this time, let's say email, right? And then interface. No, it's not going to be interface. We don't want to save any data over here, so I'm going to use session context. I'll just copy paste it. All right, so basically we created one function that is find one user. Let's be more specific. Find one user by email. And what it is going to do is it is going to basically from the client we are going to pass email and password, and then based on the email and password what it's going to do is it will match those password and email. If the user exists with the specific email and password, it will fetch that user and return the data back to the client. So for that what I need is I need a find one functionalities, but the thing is we'll go back to Mongo repository. Here we have find one functionality over here, but it is finding data based on certain, not certain, but underscore ID only. So we need one more function over here, and here what I'm going to do is find one by. All right, so by key we can say find one by key, right? So instead of ID over here we'll just pass key, and then based on the key it will search for the data. For example, we are searching for underscore ID, right? Instead of underscore ID, here we are going to search for email. So underscore ID is not useful in this case, instead email will be useful. So we'll make it generic so that we can use with any of the key. So for that what I'm going to do here is key, and then I will put key here as well. If that key is not a object ID, right, it will give error, but this time we are not going to return any error. We'll just say fmt dot println. All right, and here we are going to say, this time I'm going to use for example printf, and then I'm going to use %s is not an object ID. All right, here I'm going to pass key, cool. And then if it is not object ID, we don't have to care about it. We'll just pass those key over here. Let's see if it works. Key. All right, now key, and then the value is going to be of course it is going to be here. We, instead of object out ID, we'll just take the value. All right, key and then the value, right? So we need the value as well, so I'll pass a string. Instead of key here I should be using value. Why it's giving us error? As string value in assignment, and where is that? Here I'm going to use, all right, so we are going to use a same parameter name as well as the value over here, variable over here, so it is not allowed in Golang. Instead what here we are going to do is you can say actual value, right? And then finally I'm going to use this actual value over here. So now this value should be here, and if it is not an object ID, what I'm going to do is I'm going to assign actual value with the value itself, not value but value. Okay, note. So basically what I need to do is actual value, it is going to be of type any, or I can say it's going to be of type interface. So why can't we take interface over here as a value? That will be much better here in this case, right? So here we just need to explicitly say it is going to be of type string. In this case, even if it is not a string, it is going to give error, and we don't have to worry about that error. So finally, actually, the actual value, right? It will be coming as object ID, and if error is not there, then in that case, so we can do result, and find one is going to give Mongo result, Mongo dot single result, right? Single result, and then what I can do, I'll just copy it here and paste it here. Alright, I'll just assign it to response, not response, but it is going to be result, and then else part as well. I'm going to cut it from here, and I'll just paste it in the else part. I will do result here as well, here as well. Fine. So now if it is going to be an object ID, right? So in that case, key is going to be, of course, key, and then the value is going to be actual value, which is object ID. But if it is not object ID, in that scenario, we just need the value itself, not the actual value, right? I will just save it, and this way we make it more flexible so that it can adapt with any of the key and any of the value. All right. So I'll just save it, and then since we defined it here, right, we implemented this functionality over here, it needs to be there on the interface as well. In the previous lecture, we already talked about that. In case of interface, we are not going to use the implemented method directly. Instead, what we are going to use is we are going to rely on the interface. All right, so what I'll do here is I will just put those method signature here. I'll save it and then go back to here. So here what I can do is I can just expect some result and error, and then finally I will be having access to user dot repository dot find one by key, right? So here I will be passing the key is going to be email, of course, in this case, and then the value is going to be email again, and then the session context. Cool. Now we will be getting one user with this email. Fine. Once we get this user, what we are going to do is first we are going to check for the error. If there is any error not equals to nil, in that case what I'm going to return is nil and then error. Fine. If there's no error, that means what I'm going to do is actual, not actual, basically we can say var, and then I need a user data, right? But those data which we already talked, right, the data which we are taking from the database, we are going to map it to some struct so that we will have the structured data over there, right? So what I'm going to do here is I will just create one variable, the user, and then it is going to be of type model dot user, right? Now next thing what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this function which I have created before, map to a struct, right? And how we can do that? We can do that by using, okay, that method is present there in utils, right? So for that we need to import utils package, and how we can do that? I'm going to just copy this. My suggestion is not working properly, so you will be getting the suggestion as soon as possible if you write some piece of code. So here I'm going to just write utils and then map to struct, right? So this function is expecting what? This function is expecting data which we are going to map to a struct, and then the resultant data. So resultant data is, of course, we are going to pass first thing we are going to pass the data, which is response in this case, and then resultant data is going to be the address of the user, right? Finally, we'll check if error not equals to nil, right? If error not equals to nil, of course we are going to return nil and then error once more, and finally what we are going to do is return, if there's no error, we are going to return the user, and we are going to return nil because error is going to be nil. Here no more we are going to use interface. We are just going to say model dot user. That makes sense, right? It will give us user. But we are not done yet. We'll find this user by email and then we'll do everything, right? Now next what we can do over here is, since this method we are creating over here is going to perform certain operation, it is going to perform certain logic over here, and in this case of course the logic is very short. We are just going to map those struct into our structured data, that is in this case user, but it may be 100 line of code. It totally depends on the functionality which we are going to write. So let's see, we cannot do this, so let's remove this. Of course I'm going to switch back to interface. Why? Because then again we have to make the type compatible and then do the rest of the operation. So this is fine, cannot use response variable type interface. Okay, so here we can explicitly say, of course it is going to be a map. Sorry, I'm going to cast it to map of string and interface. Let's see if it works. No, it works. So now we are going to give, we have given the map data over there, and then the final outcome is struct, resultant struct, and then we'll be having the user ID. This is fine. And then finally what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say, okay, this user service will contain all the functionality related to user itself, right? We already learned the concept of single responsibility. As already I said in the previous video, we are whatever we are going to make, for example we are going to make user service, then user service should have all the functionality related or specific to the user. This is called single responsibility. We don't have to mug up the file to make it more modular, make it more structured, and we can easily understand it. Everyone can read it properly. So for that authentication purpose, what we are going to do is we are going to use one more file over here, auth service, we can say. You can name it as per you want. So auth service, same thing. What I'm going to do here is package service, right? And then I'm going to create one struct as auth service struct, and then the same thing is going to happen here as well. What I'm going to do here is it will have the Mongo repository, not Mongo repository. Yeah, it will have the Mongo repository. Will have the Mongo repository. Let me import that. All right, so we have imported that package over here, and then of course we are going to use the principle of interface. We are going to hide the implementation. So in this case what I'm going to use is auth service, and this time it's going to be of type interface, and this interface will contain all those method signature. So let me write the login over here, and in this login user will be passing email, which is going to be of type string, and then password, right? So now password is also going to be of type string. So why can't we create a DTO for that? In that DTO we'll be getting email and the username, and how we can do that is, let's do one thing. We'll create one more folder over here and we'll name it as a DTO, so that we can maintain all those DTO over here in this single folder, right? It will be more structured. What I will do is I will just put login, or I will just put auth underscore DTO dot go. So this auth will contain all those DTOs. For example, let's say in next video or next session we are going to use we are going to create certain APIs which is related to authentication, for example sign up or any functionalities, right, related to authentication. Then all those DTO we are going to put in this auth DTO file. So very first thing first, package is going to be DTO, and then type is going to be struct, right? In this case, of course, I'm going to name it as a login DTO, and then it's going to be a type struct. What is it expecting is there should be an email, and then it should be of type string, and finally we are going to say it should be of, if it is coming inside the JSON, right, of course it is going to come as a JSON data. So key can be in a small case as well. So this key will be mapped to this email. Okay. Now next I'm going to just copy paste. In this case it will be password, and then it will be password here. All right. I'll just save it, and then instead of that email and password, we can just use, we can say login DTO, and then DTO dot login DTO. All right. So now we have the method signature over there, and then after the login has been successful, what we are going to return is, we are going to return, for example, let's say we are going to return map of string, or we can just say interface, or okay, let's be more specific, map of string and interface. This is nothing but this totally depends on you. If you want to return in certain types which you are expecting, you want to proceed in certain way, you're thinking differently, you are totally free to use in that way. So you can play with this data type which you are going to return. That will be more beneficial, of course. So next parameter I'm going to do is return as error return as well should be there. And then finally this struct is going to implement this functionality, and how we can do that is we'll just write func, and then it is going to be auth service, right? I'm just going to use is, and then auth service. So on this auth service I'm going to implement this method. So I'll just paste this, and then I will start writing this method. But along with the repository in the auth service, I need one more thing, is user service as well. And how we are going to pass the user service here, then there's a concept of again dependency injection. What we are going to do is we are going to create this function get auth service. All right. So for this, what we are going to say is, of course we need repository over here, repository, and it's going to be of type, you can say it's going to be of type, what it was there, repo.imongo repository, right? So but in this case I'm going to get the access of all this repository. Actually this should not be imongo repository, because imongo repository is the, you know, it is going to be a single repository. Instead I want all the repository access over all this service. This is how I'm going to design it. If you want a single repository, this will work for sure, but in this scenario what will happen is I have to inject lot of different services if I need that, right? But I don't want to use that now, since it is going to be a very big file, then not file but video. So for that purpose I'm going to skip it, and then if you guys need that, you can just put down your comments below, so I will try to add those concepts over here. What I'm going to do here is, now it is going to be of type, of course I'll go in repository, and then it should be of type repository. For that what I'll do is, okay, user repository is there. So what I'm going to do is, I'm just going to type repo.repository, right? Next what I'm going to do is, I need user service here as well. So user service I can say, and then it is going to be of type iUser service, right? So finally it is going to return iAuth service, fine. And then what I'm going to do here is, as we did in user service, we are just going to say return and it's going to return iAuth not I, but the implementation of auth service. Here what we need to pass is repository, as well as it is going to hold user service, right? So we can say user service and then I user service. If you guys are facing any issue, any problem, if you are seeing it first time, you may find it difficult. Not difficult, but it is very easy. If you will just follow it, just try to write this kind of a structure more than once, practice it, you will get to know how it is working. And once you will get to know, it's very easy and it will be very beneficial for you guys if you are going to work in any organization, you are going to work on any enterprise level application, or even if you are going to work on your own application. So basically overall your application will be highly scalable and your application will be ready to adapt any new changes. That all concept we are applying here. All right, so I'm just going to write a user service over here, and then the repository I'm going to take here is get, how we did it in user, right? We just assigned the repository and we imported those repository from here. Instead we need to get the repository, I believe. So here as well what I'm going to say is repo dot repository, right? So now this repository will have user repository, right? There's one more layer we need to call specific repository to perform certain functionalities. So here we cannot say repository, instead we can say it is going to accept repo dot repository, right? Now this is completely legal, and then we'll go back to our auth service, and here also we are going to do same thing. So we'll just say repository, right? It is expecting again iMongo repository. Instead of that, what I'm going to pass here is, of course, I'm going to pass the instance of repository, repo.repository. Now this is completely fine. Now we need to assign user service, inject user service as well, because we need user service over here. We cannot, since we already made certain functionalities on user, right, to perform certain functionalities with the user collection. So we don't have to write the same code again and again. Instead, what we'll do is we'll just inject the user service and utilize its method. That is the modularity. So here what I'm going to do is we are just going to assign user service, and that is it. Now here what I can do is I will just expect the result. Result is nothing but the user itself, and then error. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to use error dot, not error, it is going to be auth service dot, we can say user, we have user service access as well. So okay, create user is not, sorry, the function which we have created just now, find one by user email, right? You can see here this function we have just implemented over here, registered on this specific struct, but this function is not present on their user service, right? So this function won't be available at all to access it from outside. So for that, what we need to do is we need to make this function as abstract, right? Now this function should be available outside of this struct. You can see we can access this function, find one user by email, and in this case we are going to pass login dto dot email, and what else? All right, we just need email. So here also we need a session context. If this auth service is also going to be used somewhere in the program, right, from there we can also pass the session context. So just make it more flexible so that we can reuse it anywhere in the program. So I'm going to do same thing here, mongo.session context, right, and then I'll pass this session context over here, right? What it's doing is it's giving error. So let's go back to user service and then see. Yeah, it's expecting two parameter, email and the session context, and then we are going to pass email as well as session context. That's completely fine. Now if we have any error, if there's any error not equals to nil, right? So what I'm going to say return is return nil and then error. right? But if there's no error, that means we will be having the user object. We cannot say user there. Instead, what we are going to do is we are going to create one variable over here, and then we are going to say this response is going to be of type user for sure. For that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to type cast it to user object. Fine. Now we will have the actual user object here. All right. Next, what we are going to do is we are going to just check for the password, and how we can do that, we'll see that in action. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to check for the user password as well. If user, since email is already matched, based on the email only we are finding the user, so we don't need to match email. Now we'll just match with the password. So if user password is going to be login dto.password, right? Now one thing to be noticed here is we are just going to match the raw password, but this is not the case which we are going to do. As of now, I'm just going to make this API, so I'm just going to proceed with the raw string password notation, right? But in real scenario, not in real scenario, but we'll see that in the upcoming videos as well. I'm going to change this password into, basically when the password is going to be stored in the database, it has to be stored in the encrypted format, so that let's say for your DB got hacked or someone saw your DB, right? They should not be able to see the password. Instead, they should be able to see some encrypted password, and that encryption is nearly impossible to encrypt. Not impossible, of course, it can be encrypted, but the thing is, it will be very tough, very tough to decrypt that password and see the actual content of that password. So even if they will somehow steal those data, right, they won't be able to use that password and log into our application. That all we'll see here in this video. So here what I'm going to do is this password is going to be of type, of course it's okay, we have defined it as an object. That is wrong, we need to rectify that. Password should be of type string, not the object ID. So this is fine now, and I'll go back to auth service. Login DTO is going to be of type string, that is fine. Mismatched, still it's mismatched. How? String, and then login password is going to be of type string. Yeah, now this is fine. And here what I'm going to say is if this matches, we are going to return the user data. So not the user data, but okay, for example, let's say I'm going to return the user data itself, user, and then error is going to be nil, not map. All right, let's say map, it's returning map. So what I will do is string interface. All right, string interface, but this time I'm going to see map of a string, and then I'll put any. All right, and next parameter is going to be nil, of course. So in here I'm going to initialize couple of fields. Let's say user, and then user is going to be of type, not type, the actual user data. So for now I'm going to put user only, and then I'm going to put token as well. So if you, I don't know if you guys are aware of what token is. We'll talk on that in detail further, but as of now I'm just passing as empty string. All right, I'll save it, and then why it is giving error. All right, here what I'm going to do is I'm going to change it to, will it work? No. What error showing? Map of string, session context is there. Am I missing? Okay, session context is not there. So let me just copy it from here. I want to do pointer. I will just paste it here, save it. Now it is completely fine, it's legal, right? So we are almost done with everything. There should be a return statement here as well if password does not matches. In that scenario we are going to return error. And how we can return that? First parameter is of course not parameter, first returning value is going to be nil, because in this case we won't be returning the user object because password mismatches. And then in next what I'm going to return is printf formatted string, and here not string f, I'm going to return error, right? So I'm going to use error f, and then here I'm going to pass password, let's say invalid credential. Now this is one more rules. You cannot say it as rules, but it is a convention. If you are going to return return authentication error, right? So you don't expose the exact error what is going to happen there, right? Let's say for example you're going to return the exact error that password mismatch, then the client will be able to know, okay, the password mismatch, that means the at least email matches, right? That is going to be, then the next time if hacker want to attack some on some functionalities, of course they know that this email exists, and then they are going to attack on the password. So don't make any way for them to enter into your application or attack any of the functionalities. So this is how we can make sure, like, this is a small thing but it can add a lot of values. This is how we can make our application more secure. So I'm going to just save it. Our authentication service is now fine. Here what error is there? Okay, we'll see that later, or else let's rectify that. So this user service is now expecting instance of type repository, but we have provided the exact user repository. So I will just delete that, and it's returning, okay, it is returning the pointer, right? So what I can do is I can just dereference it and I will save it. Fine. So now this error has gone. I will now create a controller that is going to be a authentication controller, right? Auth controller. Again, the name which you want to keep, you can keep. That's not going to be issue, but you should maintain some certain name which can be very readable and which can be very descriptive. So here in this case I'm going to use controller package controller, right? And then what we are going to do next is we are going to create one struct like what we did in user controller, right? This time we don't have to follow the concept of interface because we don't need abstraction on the user controller, not user controller but the auth controller, because of course we are not dealing with any functionality which we are going to change. Instead it will be just responsible for the data which is coming from the client side. So here what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this, since we need similar kind of functionality over here. I will paste it over here. Instead of user controller I will just write auth controller, and then do we need user service over here? No, we don't need user service over here. Instead we need the auth service, and for that we can say we need service. Okay, service should be imported over here, and I'll add import, and then this is going to be iauth, not iauth service. All right, I'm getting a lot of issues with the VS Code because of suggestions. Actually that would help you to reduce the time, but bad luck for me, but for you guys it should be coming. All right, so now we should have this auth service and the response service. Finally what we are going to do is we are going to register a couple of methods on this struct, and how we can do that we know that, of course. Here we'll just use authentication controller and then auth controller. Finally we are going to name it as a login, and then the control function, as we saw in user controller, we are not going to write this function as a plain function or parameterized. Of course it is going to be parameterized function, but not the function which we are going to use normally. In this case it must be accepting one context, and which is going to be of type gin.context, right? Gin.context, yeah. So this function, actually this function has to be a controller function, okay? Or you can say In other words, it is also said to be a handler function, which is going to handle your routes, right? And internally it can call multiple services, it can call multiple repositories, and then service will call multiple repositories and so on, right? But the thing is basically the request will land on the controller. Basically controller will be the very first gate through which your request data will be entering, right? So now it is going to be a plain function. We are not going to return anything from this function. We have registered this function. Finally, we are going to make func, and then we should have a function to return this auth controller, right? So for that, I can say get auth controller, right? And then we should have the dependency of auth service and then response service. For that, I can say basically again the same thing, dependency injection. We are going to inject this auth service and response service out of this controller where we are going to use it, okay? So that we can, it's kind of plug and play. We'll just unplug a different service over here, it will work in a different way. We'll use the actual service, it will work in a different way. It is, we are going to make it modular so that it is highly scalable, highly testable, and very easy to maintain, right? So we are following each one of this concept over here. All right, if you guys are facing any issues, put down your comment in the below section, comment section, and I will try to answer all of your queries. If you like these videos, you can of course subscribe to my channel and you can give a like. So enough talking, let's proceed. So here I need auth service, right? Is going to be of type auth service, of course, and then auth, I will name it as auth service. See, name should be always, you know, descriptive. So by reading, by just reading it, you can be able to understand is okay, this is auth service. But here why I put is AC, since here itself I have defined the type of it, so it is fine for here but not for in other scenario. If you are going to write certain functionalities, it must be very, the name should be very descriptive, otherwise later point of time you will get mugged up by yourself, by your code only. So try to follow this variable naming as a descriptive. So let's see how we are going. Now we have auth service, and then of course we need response service as well. So response service we can say, and from where it is going to come, of course utils.response service, and then finally it is going to return auth controller. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to return and auth controller, and then it needs auth service is going to be auth service, and what else? We need response service as well, right? So response service is going to be response service. So what error we are getting over here is, we'll make it, of course we are returning the address of it, so we'll make it as a pointer. I will save it, and then okay, login functionality is still pending there. So what I'll do here is I'll just put a DTO, we can say login DTO, and then it is going to be of type DTO dot login DTO. All right, and here what I'm going to do is okay, I'm going to check for the error so that we can map it successfully to the body error, and then I'm going to use gin-context function should bind JSON. Should bind JSON, and for those who don't know should bind JSON, what is should bind JSON? It will take out the request body, it will take out those JSON data and map it to the following struct, which we are going to provide. So we are going to provide login DTO over here, and then if there's any error, we are going to check for error as well. I will match it with nil, and if there's any error, what we did is we'll just go back to user controller. We can see here what we did, right? Instead of just returning the response, error response like this, what we are going to do is we are just going to say ctx. Here also we are going to say ctx dot errors, not error but error, okay? and here we need to say fmt dot error of error f, right? And then finally in the format I'm going to return the error in certain format so that I can intercept this request somewhere before finally sending the response. Why I'm going to do that? Because already I said we need to intercept the response so that we can centralize all those error at one place. We don't have to write multiple error handling, right? Error handler function and handle it separately on thousand of functions if we are going to write 1,000 functions, right? That is a irritating, time consuming process, and of course your code base is going to grow a lot more. We are not going to follow that. We are following clean architecture, we are doing everything properly, we are just creating enterprise level application. Of course there's a lot of thing involved in enterprise level application where lot of different data is coming from different data source, and there's a lot more there, but at the end the thing is the code, how they are maintaining the code. So here also we are maintaining code like the enterprise application is maintaining. So if your code is very robust, if your code is flexible, it can adapt any new changes coming in the near future, right? So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to return the, let's say, the response code, and then I'll separate it with 4 colon, or you can say 2 colon. Why I'm doing that? So that I can take out this string when we are going to handle this error as a centralized error processing. That time we will see I will exactly let you know why we did this, and it will be very beneficial. So this is just a logical things I can follow like this. If you want to follow certain different pattern, you are free to follow that. There's no issue in that. So first I will put the status code, and then I'm going to put the message. For that what I'm going to do is I'm going to do %s, and then again there I'm going to put the error, right? This error is going to be once more of type string. See, now here there's there's two things. First thing is the error which we want to send back to response to the client, right? Second thing is the exact error which happened there. So that error also we will take, but that error I won't be returning back to the client to make our application more secure. Like for example, if there is certain error happened on the database, right? So we will be having the exact error on the database. And what if I don't want to expose that exact error? For example, let's say that error expose which database I am using, right? But I don't want to expose as an app admin, right? So for that we are going to use two different things. First thing is the error which we are going to return to the user, and the actual error which happened. So why we need the actual error? Because at later point of time it will be very easy for us to debug the application. For example, this application has deployed on server, and then if something happens on server, right, we can be able to see the actual error over there. For that only what I did is first thing I need that exact error, and then lastly I need not the exact error. First thing I'm going to return the error which client needs, and second thing I'm going to return the error which we need to log, right? So here I'm going to say bad request, and of course in the coming session I'm going to replace all these hard-coded values to the specific constant so that we can maintain it easily. So bad request I can say, and then I can say second value is of course going to be of type again error. This time I'm going to say, let's say message is bad request, and then I can say error dot error. Okay, and then finally what I need is one more the actual error, right? Error. So this is how we are going to return format the error, and then we'll see how we can handle this, or we can process this error, and finally we should be able to send back the response to the client. All right, so I will just save it. I will remove this code. This is no more required, right? Now you can see the code looks very very clean, right? It's not a lengthy function, it's very compact and it looks much better. So I'm going to use the same thing over here, right? I'm going to import fmt package, and then I'll save it, and then I'll go back to user controller. I will copy paste these things since it is going to be almost same. We just need to make certain changes. So here I'm not going to use user service. I'll just say auth service, and then I'll call the login function with the DTO and then the nil. Right? It's not going to be DTO. I've defined it with name login DTO. So of course it's going to be login DTO, and this is going to be the not user controller but the account controller. Not account, sorry. It's going to be auth controller, right? Now here also it is going to be auth controller, and then response service successfully saved. Now I'm going to save it, and then finally we have the login functionality ready. Now finally what we are going to do is we'll just create one more route over here. I will name it auth route dot go, right? And then what we are going to do is we are going to map those functions to a specific route, right? A specific path. So it is going to be same. We just need to change the names. I will copy it, and repository is repository, and then instead of user service here we need user service over there. No, we need auth service, right? And then service dot get auth service, right? And then here what we need is why this is giving error, it needs to be a repository. Of course it's a repository we are passing. Let me go back to this function. Yeah, it needs to be a repository, and then user service as well. Okay, so user service is also required on that specific service. For that I need user service as well. So what I'll do is I will just control Z, right? User service is there. Now what I'll do is I'll copy paste it, and then I will put auth service, and for auth service we need repository as well as user service. Is it? Let me just no, this is going to be get auth service, and it needs repository and the user service, correct? Then finally we have response service, and this time it's not going to be user controller, so I'm going to rename it to auth controller. I'm sorry, here it is going to be control D and then auth controller, right? So now here also I'm going to use get auth controller, and what it is expecting is authentication service as well as response service, which I already have provided. So authentication service is going to be what is going to be declared and not used. Auth service this same, right? So why it's giving error? Do we need to dereference it? No. Let me save it. Why? So let's see, get auth service is returning what? It's returning iAuth service. That's completely fine. And what this is expecting is auth service. Sorry. So here it should be actually iAuth service, and then here it should be auth service. Let me just save it and go back to auth route, and this is fine now. So auth controller, this time I'm going to say login. All right, here I'm going to say login. I'll just save it. Instead of registering user route, I'll say register auth route. We are finally done with creating APIs, right? Now I will just use this functionality in the main route so that it can be registered on the application. So here I will put auth route. Let me give a space so that it will look much better. Auth, you can say not auth routes, right? And then we can say router dot group, and then we can say auth. So all the authentication route will go on /auth as a base path. All right. So here what I'm going to use is just copy paste, and then this time it is going to be register auth routes, and this is going to be auth routes. Cool. Now we are done with creating login API. We have login API in place, and we just need to test it. Before this video we have created
create user API as well, but we have not tested this. Let's wait for a couple of more minutes, or we'll just test this both functionality in the upcoming videos. Till that time, if you just want to run it, you can run it and test it with any client application. Either it is going to be a Vue.js application, you can integrate this API and you can just test this application, or else if you want to use Postman, you can do test it with Postman as well. What Postman is, Postman, already I said Postman is nothing but to test the API. So for that you can download Postman, and hereafter in upcoming video we are going to use Postman for the testing of the API. So I will be creating all those things here in the upcoming videos. I will be testing before getting dive into code. We will be testing that both API which we have created so far, and for now what we are just going to do is we are just going to get inside server folder, and then we'll just run this application and we'll see if this is working fine or not. There should not be anything which is breaking. Okay, so let's see how it goes. You can see our application has started without any issue. So meanwhile, till the next video I will be uploading, and meanwhile you can go through these APIs and you can understand each of the concept which we discussed together. And if you guys face any issue, you just need to ping me. I will be available for you anytime, and then we will discuss that further, right? Just wait for some more time. I will be meeting you in the next video with couple of more interesting features and couple of more interesting concepts, right? So thank you guys, thank you, and we will test this in the further video.